Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Connecticut LGBTQ Film Festival. And thank you for joining us for the Q&A session for Rūrangi. And I should ask Cole Meyers here, who has joined us as the writer and the creator of the series and co-producer. How do you really pronounce Rrangi?
It's Rūrangi, so it's two rolled R's and emphasis on the first U.
Uh-oh, am I in trouble?
No, it's a tricky one. It is. We're used to it in New Zealand. How to negotiate those different characters, like the macron over the U, which actually has been a little bit of a fight sometimes because it's not a character that's recognized in on a lot of website formatting and things like that, and we're like, no, it's really important that macron is there.
I think it was playing havoc with some of my emails and
yeah, it does that.
So why don't we just start off with you telling us a little bit about your inspiration for the story?
Well, I've got a lot of feelings about trans narratives and trans representation, that's for sure. And sort of when I came on board to this, there was already a very kind of loose idea about what sort of storyline was happening. It was quite different, I think, back on it now. It's like it was Kaz goes back to his hometown and becomes mayor. So it's not that anymore. But I kind of came in on the back of some previously bad experiences where I'd been brought on as just a consultant at often quite last minute and things, and had sort of been expected to be more of rubber stamping other people's work. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, the trans seal of approval, and had felt, like I was in a bit more of a fight mode, I guess, when I came on board to this, that I had quite strong ideas about what I wanted to see and what I didn't want to see. And as I got to know everyone and as I got to work with everyone, I realized I didn't need to be in that mode because everyone was already 100% on board with wanting to tell trans stories right and wanting to tell them with the right people steering that ship. But I had a kind of list of things that I wanted to see and list of things that I didn't want to see. And I'll go with the positive stuff. And, I wanted to see trans people, like, one, being alive, low bar sometimes, and successful and having work and friends and family and community and, not being a transition related or physical related narrative. I find so many trans stories, even when they aren't painting us as victims or villains or crazy, are so focused on this idea of transition and this external view. I think transition narratives have quite an external view of like, we see you as this and now we see you as this, or just don't go into that depth of kind of the emotional aspect about being trans and the community stuff about being trans. I wanted to see the kinds of friendships and the kind of love that I was seeing, around me all the time, and that strength of community and support, and also the burden of being, being in an activist community and I guess, the relying on others in a good way, and they're relying on others, you know, in a difficult way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my list of like what I wanted to see and what I didn't want to see were like pages and pages long. So, you
Well,
know,
I agree.
every time someone brings up something that they like about it, I'm like, yes, good. Like, glad I
Well,
squeezed that in.
I definitely agree that this is kind of the next level of trans filmmaking, just because of the storylines, and we agree. We see a lot of at the film festival. We see a lot of documentaries and a lot of things about transitioning, and so we really appreciated this because it is kind of that next level.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's something that I talk about quite a lot, is that a lot of the stuff that you see is made for cis people to watch about trans people.
Yeah.
You know, because it comes from we need to make things explainable to cis people. And, you know, there are things, if you're making stuff for trans people, and that was at the forefront of my mind the entire time, that was my, you know, primary audience was trans people. And that was my primary gauge of whether or not it had been successful, was whether, if I watched it, there was stuff in there that I didn't need explaining to me because I already understood it at that really, really deep level. And that's something that I found so amazing to hear from the community, is that sense of like, I watched this and I felt like I was seen, and that my life and my experiences are seen as being valuable and important enough to put on screen. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Talking about that a little more, you yourself have been described as a trans activist, a teacher, and a writer. How much of Kaz is you, and how much of Kaz's story is your own, if any?
I mean, there are certainly aspects of it for sure. I am a trans activist, and educator and consultant, and I, do exist in a community of trans activists in Auckland, doing intersectional work and feeling, the burden of burnout and all of these aspects. And I certainly, have dealt with, significant ongoing mental health stuff myself. But, I'm an Auckland kid. I'm a city kid. I've never lived in small towns. My relationship with my family is excellent and continuous. And I mean, what else? There's certainly some stuff about romantic relationships that's influenced by my experiences. But again, those were things that I wanted to see. I wanted to see a gay trans man, which wasn't something that I was really seeing. So often the stories that even, include romantic elements, like in a positive sense, that aren't actually, abusive or borderline abusive, or aren't seen as being, well, I guess you're attractive, or I guess I'll have sex with you kind of way. I wanted that sense of like, boy, I'm really into this person. And it's not a, last person on earth kind of situation. But the complicated nature of sexuality when the reference point to someone that you're with changes, and what does that mean if the love is still there or if the attraction is still there? There's kind of more complex things that I certainly influenced by my own experience. So there is parts of Kaz that are me, and there are parts of Kaz that are certainly not me. And I think when Els came on board as well, that became very much more moving away from me, you know, because I identify as non-binary, and Kaz doesn't identify as non-binary, and Elle certainly has a, like, you know, much more charming, like, strong masculine presence than I feel like I have. Yeah, but it was nice. It was nice, actually, the way that we worked, you know, as a filmmaking crew. There was a lot of space for flexibility and adaptability at lots of stages. So when, you know, we did cast, there was, you know, going back and looking at the script again and looking at the character again and adapting it.
Yeah, I understand that Elle hadn't done formal acting before. He had done some singing. So in terms of him playing the role, did you, and the other thing is that the dialogue was very sparse for him and at times. And so I wonder, was a lot of that emotion that he conveyed so well, was that written into the script? Was that something that he needed a lot of coaching on? I mean, he did an amazing job, but I'm just wondering, kind of like, was any of it improvised? Was it just, you know, talk about that a little bit?
I mean, yeah, first off, Els is just phenomenal, and I feel incredibly grateful to, you know him and have worked with him, and, you know, excited that this is his first thing and where he goes from here. I'm just, yeah. And he's, you know, he's also just an incredibly lovely human being, so that always helps. As far as dialogue and things like that, certainly there was lots of passes of the script, and lots of kind of working to strip back the dialogue, as I think we got to know him and we got to know the depth and range of his ability to express emotion. And also, I think, like, as an actor myself, you know, both me and Max, the director, were wanting to kind of, you know, trust in that, and trust in that you don't actually have to, you know, say things in words, where a looks, you know, that, you know, 1,000 words business or whatever, but, you know, can say it so much better. And certainly in my own work, as opposed to, I also do scripts and storylining for a soap opera in New Zealand, which is a very, very different skill set. But, you know, in my own work, I definitely like to stay on the quieter end of things. And, you know, the beauty of silences and the beauty of making space for emotions. And I know, you know, Max, the director, did a lot of improv work as well, with all the actors, you know, as far as, you know, building the relationships between them and finding those things. And there ended up being lots of little bits and pieces from improv work dotted throughout the script that just, I feel like, you know, make it more of this collaborative sense, which is kind of, you know, a huge thing that we wanted. And there was one other thing that I was going to say about that. Whatever. Oh, and I think, you know, also hugely so, you know, casting trans actors in trans roles means that, you know, there doesn't have to be the dialogue there, and there doesn't even have to be, you know, the description there, action, you know, and trying to explain things, because, you know, there are things that I don't need to explain to Els. that I would need to sit down for hours and talk to someone else, if like this would never happen, but if I was casting a cis actor in a trans role. Yeah, that we just get that. But we did have conversations, because Els doesn't come from an activist background at all. In fact, I think I was the first trans person other than himself that he'd ever met. So that's, so we did a lot of talking about what that world is like and the emotions behind that. But yeah, certainly all the stuff around, what it feels like to, all those microaggressions or the sense of shame or guilt or difficulties with family or complicated things in relationships and hope and all of these things about being trans that just aren't really kind of explored, I think, often.
Yeah. One thing that was explored, and I thought you did a great job of doing it, was exploring mental health and depression. Can you talk a little bit about that in the film?
Yeah, it was a fine line, really, to kind of, because I didn't want to make this piece that was showing trans experiences being negative or just victims of trauma or all of these things like that. But I don't think that you can make a piece about trans experience without at least touching on or talking about the role of trauma, and to be very clear about that the trans experiences of mental health come from an experience of marginalization rather than some kind of pathological sense of transness itself, which some people can get confused about. When you look at indicators of acceptance and things like that, once you account for that, there actually isn't any difference in trans people's mental health from cis people's mental health. But yeah, the experience of being trans, certainly for me, is very wrapped up in mental health because of the way trans people are seen and marginalized in society. And yeah, it's one of those things where it's very hard to talk about how, like, decisions to intentionally put elements of mental health in, because it just came, like, my writing comes from a very intuitive place, and sometimes I won't notice that I've put in things until I kind of go back with that English teacher mindset and critical reading and things like that. But certainly making sure that we talked about mental health and that weren't making either a tragedy version of being trans, or what sometimes happens when people are like, oh God, I don't want to get anything wrong, so I'll just make all the trans characters perfect and have perfect lives and never get anything wrong and you never have any difficulties. So he certainly didn't want to show that either, because I don't think that's helpful as a portrayal, because it's not relatable. And and if it's not relatable, then there isn't that scaffolding for change or movement. And yeah, I mean, I also do a lot of consulting around mental health stuff as well. And so these ideas about that it's much better to show mental health stories from an element of stories of mastery. So it's like, what what factors about someone's life can be protective or can be healing from mental health difficulties, rather than just showing, this is how it gets tragically bad, or, no one's got any mental health problems ever. And so showing the fact of, for Kaz, this, having community and the role of truth and honesty and standing up for yourself and having those connections and relationships and meaningful purpose. Certainly that's been one of the largest factors for me as far as mental health is, in a positive sense, has been having meaning and purpose to what I do.
So speaking of standing up for the trans community and making this for the trans community, I noticed that they never ever mentioned Kaz's former name or Kaz's dead name, and the pictures, there were no pictures of Kaz, from the past. So
yeah,
talk about that.
Good picking up on those things. I feel like actually, even when people don't consciously notice those things, those are seeding things in the back of their mind about, like, hey, those things aren't things that we want to be talking about in a general sense. I mean, every trans person is different, and some people are, have different feelings about dead names and about pictures from before and things like that. But in general, I think it's quite important that we keep kind of going, hey, let's just go with a default of, like, don't do that. But yeah, it was, because this was made for the trans community, when I watch stuff and I see those things, there is this sense of at minimum a prickliness, and at worst often like quite a physical, like, nauseous reaction sometimes to hearing dead names or seeing this emphasis on, here's you before, or here's the real you. The other thing that I was careful not to do as well is Kaz never refers to himself as anything other than Gerald's child,
Yep.
So, and he never refers to himself as, I used to be, you remember me as whatever. In fact, not just that, but the reaction, I can't think of how quite to say this, that there's a strong emphasis on his experience of hearing a dead name without actually us hearing the dead name.
Yeah.
And there's also a part at the beginning where we see the reaction of him and Ellie to a disgusting transphobic poster, but we don't actually see the disgusting transphobic poster, and we don't hear anything about what it actually says on it. It's enough, it's enough to trust the audience that the way that they're looking at it and the way that they're referring to it, we can guess what it probably says.
Yeah.
And we've, as is happening all around the world really, but in New Zealand we've had a more recent upsurge in it of that kind of stuff coming up. And I was like, there is no way that I want to give any screen time whatsoever to those things.
Yeah. I want to ask another question about the Myori Storylines, and how I understand that you had some consultants on the film who were there to ensure that the Tikanga story came through properly. And so I was wondering if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, um, we certainly the three C words that come up the most for this is compassion, collaboration, and consultation. And so we had a lot of consultants. So we had and kind of it's certainly, in the same way that it wasn't enough to have one trans person be in charge of like all the trans stuff. And we had a whole panel of extra consultants on that regard. But it wasn't enough to just have one Māori consultant. And also recognizing that, it's not enough to just have knowledge in one area of that there is actually specialty areas within areas of consultation. So we had someone who was particularly there around the te reo, so the language, and someone who was the Māori consultant specifically around kind of queer issues and takatapui, which is the kind of Māori name for, I guess it's the same with, all words like this that don't have great translations, but, it's a rainbow Māori term, essentially. And we had Māori consultants around tikanga and around the story plotting and story editing, and on the trans consultation panel we had a Māori trans woman as well. So we kind of, as well as the many cast and crew who are also Māori, and certainly we, while not wanting to put them in roles of consultants, that they're very much emphasis on them being actors first and foremost, and to refer any stuff that they got on that front, to the consultants, to not put that extra burden on them. And at the same time, to make sure that we empowered everyone, really, but specifically in relation to this question, empowered people to speak up about anything that they saw or heard that, that they had thoughts about or problems with, regardless of what kind of place in the hierarchy of everything they were. And that was important, because so often I feel like, sometimes you watch stuff and you go, how could this possibly have got all the way to being made and being on screen and me seeing this, and not any single person in the whole process gone, oh guys, that's really bad, hurtful, problematic, offensive. And I think a lot of it comes down to that kind of thing is, at each point, everyone's a little bit like, oh, I think this is a problem, but maybe it's not true. Maybe I shouldn't bother those people. It's not my place. And so it was very important that we fostered an environment, in regards to all these kind of consultation issues that people, could raise things.
Of Jem and Anahara, I love their characters as well, but we just kind of barely scratched the surface. I mean, they were very nuanced characters, but we kind of just scratched the surface of their inner turmoil and, their inner lives, exploring their own sexuality. And I'm wondering, are you intending to explore those more in season 2?
Well, as far as season 2, God, I hope so. Yes, absolutely. I was my secret is Jem is actually my favorite character. No, it's not a secret. I've told all of that. Yeah, absolutely. That was really important as well. Kind of I guess going back to my sort of things that I wanted to see was, I didn't want this to just be Kaz's story, to be just a story about a trans person, but actually this was about, that there is a trans leading character, yes, and being trans is obviously, an aspect of his experience and his story, but is not the main thing. And part of that was making sure that there was this kind of core. The trio really is the core, but if we also, add Gerald in there as well, and and Ellie going forwards. But yeah, to make sure that those characters were, like you said, nuanced and complex, and I also I love that kind of, that the trio of really like lovable friends that you just like, you just want to be friends with them. You want to get in there and be like, oh, you're so cool, or like, oh, you're so like awkward and charming, and all of these kind of things. I think that's one thing that I've really enjoyed hearing, has been, the love that I have for these characters, and the connection that I have with these characters is something that I'm hearing other people say as well. And every time people are like, I just want to know more, I just want to, like, win season 2, what's gonna happen with Kaz and Jem, and like, how's Anahita gonna do this, and I love hearing that. It really warms my heart.
So just to wrap up, I want to ask another question. We saw this film as a series. We saw it in its original series format of 5 episodes, but I understand there's also been a feature version of it that's been made. Have you had a chance to see the feature version?
Yes, I have.
So
I really like it. I think, from the beginning we knew that this worked well when you sort of watch them all together. But yeah, when we got the chance to recut it to make it even better as a 90-minute feature, that was really exciting as well. And yeah, even just moving up from originally like a tiny bit of nothing much of web series to like now it's a feature film is really exciting, and I think is really testament to kind of how much love there has been that's been put into the film, and how much passion and just huge amount of talent that was drawn to making this, but also the thirst out there for this kind of media and this kind of representation, and this kind of way of making films. I think because this was always not just about the storyline that we were seeing, but this was about whenever I work with things like that, it's like, how much more can we, like, how many more layers back can we do these things? And so things like consultation panels with veto power, meeting like frequently throughout the process to kind of like keep making sure that we're on the right track. Compulsory gender identity training for all cast and crew, all trans actors played by trans, all trans characters played by trans actors.
Yeah.
And in fact, other characters which weren't intentionally trans, are also played by trans actors, and because that's important too.
Yeah.
And we also had an internship program, a paid creative internship program, because I feel like it's not enough to just kind of put out work of our own, but to make sure that we're seeding the way for future work. And so we had interns in directing, producing, editing, wardrobe. Oh God.
You're creating an army of
art. Yeah, and camera. So yeah, creating that space for the future as well. And part of our production companies, Kaupapa or ethics is about returning profits to the trans creative community, to further kind of support more stuff like this.
Yeah. All right. Well, I am so happy you were.
I can't even remember what the original part of the question was then. It's just been exciting talking to you, and I just feel like I've just kind of blah 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 blah.
It's been really great because I'm happy that we're able to speak like this, because I don't think we really would have been able to afford to fly you in from New Zealand. So thank you, technology, for allowing us to have this time with you. And,
absolutely.
Good luck with everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, here's to season 2s and more movies and.
All right. Yes. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.